believe we are specifically discussing the forum which took place yesterday.
Yes, and the statement that was made by the former vice president of the Islamic University.
Yes. I mean, the forum was by all standards impressive. It was carried live on Pan-African television as well as Telesu in Caracas. And Telesu covers almost the whole of South America. So even though the forum was held at the Freedom Center in Accra, it was a forum which was watched around the world, and that was very significant. The other significant thing is that Yuri Pimentel, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, actually took part in this forum by video connection. And there were all kinds of people from all the political parties in Ghana and all the broad-based social movements also in the country. They all took part in this forum. And this is a reflection of the depth of concern of the Ghanaian people about what is happening in Caracas. I am becoming deeply worried by what is happening. Indeed, what is happening in Caracas is perhaps the worst form of colonialism. The demands of the US are simply outrageous. One of the demands is that the major national resource of Venezuela, which is oil, should be put under the direct control of the US president. I mean, where does this happen? That one country's national resources should be put under the direct control of another country's president. It's unbelievable, but this is the demand. Number two, the US is demanding that Venezuela should cut off all economic relations with Russia, China, and Iran. I mean, it's preposterous in the extreme. And Cuba. So the US now is demanding that it should be in charge of the foreign policy of an independent sovereign state. Unbelievable. Completely unbelievable. You know, and there are other such outrageous demands. Now, be that as it may, there's also been a lot of lies. A lot of lies have been spread about what is happening in Caracas. And one of those is the lie that his own bodyguards betrayed him and that they were bribed by the intelligence services of the United States of America to betray him. Now, the purpose of that lie is to falsely create the impression that Maduro had no support. Because even if his own bodyguards could betray him, then he had no support, then he's very weak and so on, and therefore justifies the US action. The facts are different. One, there was heavy resistance from his bodyguards, leading to a situation in which 80 of his bodyguards were killed by the invading forces, 80 of them. These 80 bodyguards of Maduro who were killed by the invading forces included 32 Cuban internationalists were killed. So it cannot be true. The US has itself admitted that many of his special forces suffered varying degrees of injury. And as we speak, some of them are in critical condition in US hospitals. In addition to that, there is also confirmation that at least one US helicopter was shot in the confrontation. So that is a lie. It's not true. Now, there are many interesting aspects of this whole, standoff and so on. And one is the very interesting statement which was made by President Donald Trump. When asked if the Venezuelan opposition would take over the leadership of the country, he said two things. One, that the Venezuelan opposition has no respect in Venezuela. The people of Venezuela do not respect the opposition leaders, especially Machado, who was only recently given a Nobel Prize. This is Donald Trump. Says they have no respect. The Venezuelans don't respect them. Then he made a second point, that they don't have the competencies to run Venezuela. Now, this is the U.S. who has always argued that Maduro lost the elections to the opposition. Now, if the people of Venezuela, according to him, do not respect the opposition, how do they vote for the opposition to beat Maduro in the election? And if he's convinced that they don't have the competencies to run Venezuela, what is this hue and cry over the opposition having lost an election and therefore it's legitimate for the opposition to take over power? To run Venezuela again? It simply doesn't make any sense at all. Now, for me, the other situation simply is that in spite of the kidnapping or abduction of Nicolas Maduro, his government remains intact. His government still controls majority of the seats in parliament. Vast majority of the seats in parliament is in the hands of the Maduro government. Indeed, the Supreme Court of Venezuela has just sworn in Maduro's vice as the interim president, and it is obvious that they are in control. Now, what is also interesting is that the streets of Venezuela are dominated by Chavistas. They have taken control of the streets completely. The opposition tried to organize a demonstration in which only about 300 or so people showed up. They cannot mobilize people onto the streets. So the streets are also in the hands of the Maduro forces and so on. Now, significantly, the interim president, who used to be vice president of Maduro, has said that as far as Venezuela is concerned, Maduro remains the president of Venezuela, and that they will not succumb to colonization from the U.S. and so on. So the stand of the Venezuelan government is also absolutely clear. Now, a few other things are worthy of mention, which is the solidarity that Venezuela is receiving from South American or Latin American countries. Indeed, almost all of them, with the exception of one, have declared full solidarity with Venezuela. And indeed, yesterday, 6 of them issued a joint statement calling for the immediate release of Maduro and describing what had happened as illegal and so on. This is Latin America, this is South America, and so on. Now, interestingly, yesterday, Donald Trump called the president of Colombia and changed his tone completely, and is now inviting the president of Colombia to the White House for discussion, for conversation. Now, he had been threatening the president of Colombia. He's been threatening the president of Colombia that what happened to Maduro would happen to him if he does not support the U.S. kidnapping of a sitting president of Caracas. So now he's changed completely. Why has he changed? Because it's obvious that they are losing the plot. You understand? They are losing the plot. Yesterday, Donald Trump announced that billions of barrels of Venezuelan oil will be handed over to the U.S. and that if sold, he will control the money. Resources of Venezuela handed over to the U.S. for sale, and the president of the U.S. will control the money. Why does this happen? In any case, under law, under any law, both domestic and international law, that does not stand. Because any agreement which is procured under duress is null and void. And he's been threatening the leadership of Venezuela to hand in the oil or he would invade them. So that is obtaining that resource under duress. And it's a violation of both U.S. law, it's a violation of international law, and a violation of all laws. Now, the other thing which is also important, and it's been raised by Senator Bernie Sanders and others, even including some senators from the Republican Party, is that what happened in Caracas is a violation of U.S. law. Because under U.S. law, the president of the U.S. cannot use American troops on a foreign land, cannot declare war without congressional approval. And this was done without congressional approval. There also appears to be a lot of confusion in the United States itself, in the political establishment of the even in the Trump government. Trump is talking about money, how to make money for America, how to seize the oil resources of Venezuela and hand them over to American companies. His whole focus is on how to make money for America, how to steal resources and make money out of these resources. His Secretary of State is not talking about money. His Secretary of State, who is originally Cuban, is a Cuban, Cuban immigrant. He is talking about using Venezuela in order to crush Cuba. And he's saying it openly. He's saying that, look, Venezuela has been the only or perhaps the main supplier of fuel to Cuba. In fact, Cuba imports about 30,000 barrels of crude from Venezuela on a daily basis. And he's saying that if they can seize control of Venezuelan oil and prevent Venezuela from sending oil to Cuba, Cuba would automatically collapse and his purpose would have been achieved. So there's no policy coherence. No policy coherence. You understand? Absolutely no policy coherence in the Trump administration. Within 24 hours of the attempted invasion of Venezuela, there were demonstrations, pro-Venezuelan demonstrations in 75 cities in the United States of America. 75 cities in the United States of America. So a lot of Americans, many Americans, reject what their government has done. Now let's talk about the issues which are being raised against Maduro, and I'll just deal with two. One is narco trafficking. Of course, the records are clear. The United States is the biggest state which, on the basis of evidence and record, has been involved in narco trading. The Contra affair is clear. The Contra affair is clear. I mean, the U.S., supplied drugs or put drugs on the international market in order to raise money to fund insurgency in Latin America. And that record is very clear. In fact, the rebels who supported in Iran actually were financed with narco money. This is official. The CIA was engaged in narco trafficking. So that is clear. You understand? The U.S. has been involved in narco trade. There's no evidence whatsoever linking Maduro to narco trading. No evidence. The U.S. has not been able to provide a shred of evidence linking Maduro to narco trading and so on. So that collapses, completely. Now, the initial charges which were preferred against Maduro were laughable. One of the charges was simply that Maduro was in possession of a machine gun. Can you believe this? The president of Venezuela was in possession of a machine gun, not in the United States, but in his palace. And that's a basis for arresting him and putting him on trial in the United States of America. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah. Whatever it is, the U.S. can only exercise the kind of control it wants over Venezuela if it can take over Venezuela. Donald Trump cannot run Venezuela sitting in Washington if he does not put troops on the ground in Venezuela. Now, I know Venezuela a bit, Even the geography of Venezuela is a challenge. The geography of Venezuela. Even Caracas. The geography of Caracas is a challenge. It's a mountainous, forested region. And to put troops on the ground to control Venezuela is an uphill task. The U.S. Army is not capable of doing that. In fact, Venezuela is far more complicated than Libya, which was a desert area. It's far more complicated than Vietnam, and so on. So to put troops on the ground is a major challenge for the U.S. They can't do it and succeed. And if they cannot do that and succeed, they cannot take control of Venezuela. Now, of course, they've annoyed all the forces in the world. China has been very, very strong on this matter. Russia has been very strong on this matter. Indeed, Ghana under President Dramani Mahama has taken a very firm stand on this matter. The AU statement is not that strong, but it's still opposed to what has happened in Venezuela. And it sees what has happened in Venezuela as a violation of international law and so on. Increasingly, the US is becoming isolated. Okay. Now, these are the kicks. What the US is doing are the kicks of a dying empire. And if you go through history, it's there. That is how Spain, as the dominant power in the world, collapsed. That is how Britain, which at a certain stage in history controlled 25% of the land area of the world, collapsed. And certainly, these are the signs that the US empire is about to collapse. What happened yesterday in the forum is perhaps one of the beginnings of many things that will happen throughout the world. Progressive forces are going to be meeting, to be discussing the issue, and to be strategizing about how to solidarize with the people and government of Venezuela. And I'm confident that ultimately victory will be on the side of the progressive forces.
There will be huge